This is Encore Lesson 94 about histograms. Now it's important for me to start by saying that histograms really go hand in hand with what we talked about in Encore Lesson 93, which was frequency tables. Because histograms look a lot like a bar graph, but instead of making a bar for each of the points in a data set, we're actually grouping them together by intervals and seeing how many times that whatever it is that we're measuring occurs within that interval and making a bar for that. So it's actually multiple data values within one of the bars, so that's what makes it a little different than a bar graph, which I know that you're familiar with. So we're going to look at this example that they have here, which is data on the number of hours of TV watching per week. So you can see if I scroll down here a little bit, in order to make a histogram, they have gone ahead and done exactly what I suggested, which is to make a frequency table first. So they have the intervals of 1 to 4 hours, 5 to 9 hours, 10 to 14 hours, 15 to 19 hours, and 20 to 24 hours. You can imagine if we did 1 through 24, we would have 24 bars on a graph, which would be a very large bar graph. So by doing a histogram, we've actually narrowed it down to only 5. And we're seeing how many times that occurs within those 5 intervals instead of making 24 bars on our graph. So we're looking at this table of data and we're adding up how many times we see a number in that interval and adding it onto our frequency chart. So people watching 1 to 4 hours of TV a week, they've actually only found 1, which is right here. So they put a 1 that only occurs 1 time. Now 5 to 9 hours, they've found that twice. I easily spotted the 5. And it looks like the 8 is our other in there. So they put 2. That only occurred 2 times in that interval. Now you can see that they've done the other 3 for us. And I can also see very quickly that the majority of people are watching between 20 and 24 hours of TV a week because that's occurring 10 times, where in these other intervals it's much lower. So we have our frequency table. How many people are watching how many hours of TV within these different intervals, these 5 intervals. We are going to translate this now into a histogram. You can see that it's always going to be labeled. On the top, they have the same label as our table, which is number of hours of TV watching per week. And on the bottom, they have frequency, how many times it's occurring, much like our frequency table here. And they have hours, much like our frequency table again. We're just translating this into what looks like a bar graph, but it's actually called a histogram since it's the intervals. We shade up to 1 to represent that only 0 to 4, only 1 time it's occurring. 5 to 9, we're jumping up to 2. Now they've decided to go with a different shading technique every other. They are touching, so if you shade them all, it could be a little difficult to see, but either way, it's the same concept. If you do want to shade all of these, you can. They just decided to do it every other so it's easier to see. And when we're all done here, we have 5 bars. And it just makes it a little easier to represent what's going on in this frequency table. You can see that this last one, although we've already identified it, is much higher than the other 4, which means that it's occurring more in this last interval here. More people are watching 20 to 24 hours of TV. Okay? Now let's look at one more example here. We have our table. So we're going to do the frequency table first. We're going to find out how many times these data numbers are occurring within these intervals, and then we're actually going to make our histogram over here on the right. We'll do 1 or 2 of the columns together, and then I'll leave the other 3 or so for you guys to try on your own once you get the gist of it. So let's look at 0 to 19, our first interview here, and we're looking at the number of minutes and how many times it's occurring. So I'm looking for any numbers here that are between 0 and 19. I see 19. And that appears to be it. So I'm going to put that that's only occurring once. The frequency is only once. Next, I'm looking for 20 to 39. I see a 28, 38. I'm going to go ahead and erase this one so I don't lose my count. 28, 29. Let's see, 24, 34. Here's a 39, which would fall in this interval because it does say until 39. And a 21. 5, and that appears to be it. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That occurs 9 times, a lot more than that first interval. Now, to make our histogram, if you remember back to the one that we just looked at, on the side here, we need to label it frequency. And on the bottom, we're going to use whatever units we're comparing the frequency of. In this case, we're going to look over here and it's going to be minutes. Now, we're going to label it. The minutes go from 0 to 19, 20 to 39, 40 to 59, and 60 to 79. Now, we're only going to do the first two together, and you guys can do the other two. And for frequency, I'm just going to do 1 to 10. Okay. Now from 0 to 19, it occurred once, so I'm going to make a bar up to the 1. But from 20 to 39, it occurred 9 times, so I'm going to make a bar up to the 9. Again, you can leave them open, you can shade them, you can do either or, you can do every other, whichever way you want to do, but you can see that we have a visual representation of this occurring a lot more in the 20 to 39 range than it did in the 0 to 19.